4,000 years ago, a woman made a mistake inside her tent. And because of that mistake, today, people are dying in Gaza, in Tel Aviv, in Beirut. It is not an exaggeration. The Bible predicted it in a single phrase. A phrase written before Islam existed, before Muhammad, before oil, before the word Palestine. And that phrase keeps being fulfilled every night you turn on the news. In the next 40 minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what that prophecy says, who fulfilled it, and why no peace treaty will be able to cancel it. Because Jews and Arabs are not enemies. They are brothers, sons of the same father. And the wound that separates them was not opened by a modern war. It was opened by a human decision in a room, one night, 40 centuries ago. That decision was made by Abraham's wife. Her name was Sarah. She was 75 years old. She had decades of marriage without a single pregnancy, and she had a promise from God that seemed more impossible every year. God had told Abraham 10 years before that he was going to be the father of a nation, that his descendants would be like the stars of heaven, that from his blood would come a people that would change the history of humanity. But Sarah remained barren, and every month that passed was 1 month closer to the end of her fertile life. And every month that passed, God's promise sounded more like a cruel joke. Until one night, Sarah did what many Christians do today. She decided to help God. She decided that the promise was taking too long. She decided that if God was not going to hurry, she would take charge. And she offered her husband to another woman. I need to pause here, because what I am about to say is going to seem shocking to you. In the cultural context of the ancient Near East, what Sarah proposed was completely legal. It was completely normal. It was completely expected. In the Nuzi tablets discovered in 1925 in northern Mesopotamia, archaeologists found marriage contracts that reflect older traditions and describe exactly this. If a wife could not conceive, she had to provide a slave to her husband as a surrogate womb, and the child born from that union would be considered legally the son of the principal wife. Sarah was not inventing anything. Sarah was following the cultural manual of her era. But God does not operate by cultural manuals. God had promised a son through Sarah, through the impossible body of Sarah, not through a pragmatic solution. And when a human tries to accelerate a divine promise with human methods, the result is always the same: chaos for him, for his children, for his grandchildren, and sometimes for entire millennia of descendants. The slave was named Hagar. She was Egyptian. Abraham had probably received her during his passage through Egypt several years earlier, when Pharaoh gave him gifts for taking Sarah, believing her to be his sister. There are archaeologists who suspect that Hagar may have been more than a common slave. Some ancient Jewish traditions, gathered in the Midrash Bereshit Rabbah, suggest she was the daughter of a minor pharaoh, a princess turned servant. We cannot confirm it, but the narrative symmetry is striking. Abraham accepted the proposal. The biblical text does not tell us if he hesitated. It does not tell us if he discussed it. It only says in Genesis that Abraham listened to the voice of Sarah. That phrase in Hebrew is going to return later with a terrible weight. It is the same formula God said to Adam in the garden before the curse. You listen to the voice of your wife. When a man listens to his wife before God, the consequences rarely stay within the marriage. Hagar became pregnant on the first attempt, and here begins the crack that, 4,000 years later, is still open. If you think this is a pretty story of patriarchs in turbans, wait. What comes is where the story turns uncomfortable. Because the first act of hostility in this entire saga was not committed by a man. It was not committed by an army. It was not committed by a country. It was committed by a woman inside her own house against another woman who also slept under the same roof. When Hagar knew she was pregnant, She looked with contempt at her mistress. In Hebrew, the word used is kalal. It means to make small, to despise, to subtract value, to reduce. Hagar began to treat Sarah as if Sarah were no longer worth anything, as if having conceived had automatically converted her into something superior. The slave felt like a queen, the queen felt like a slave. And Sarah exploded. She went to Abraham with a fury that the text records with pain. "May my wrong be upon you. I gave my servant into your bosom. And when she saw she was pregnant, she looked upon me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abraham washed his hands. He told Sarah that Hagar was under her authority, that she should do with her what seemed good to her. And Sarah, turned into a wounded, humiliated, and vengeful woman, began to treat Hagar with such harshness that the pregnant servant fled to the desert, a woman with a baby in her womb, alone, without water, without company, walking toward her own death. And here something happens that forever changes the history of the world, because God, the God of Abraham, the God of the promise, the God who supposedly was interested only in the lineage of Sarah's son, does not abandon the Egyptian slave. He goes after her. The angel of the Lord found Hagar by a fountain of water on the way to Shur, the route that led toward Egypt. Hagar was returning home to her land, to die among her own. And the angel asked her a question that is possibly the most tender question in all the Old Testament. "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where do you come from and where are you going?" Stop on that phrase. God knows the answer. God knows perfectly who she is, where she comes from, and where she is going. The question is not for information. The question is so that Hagar can hear herself saying out loud what her broken heart was carrying. Hagar answered with brutal honesty, "I flee from the presence of my mistress." And then the angel does three things every Christian should read twice. First, he orders her to return to the house where they were mistreating her, to return to submit to Sarah, to return to the exact place she was fleeing from. Second, he makes her a promise, an enormous promise. "I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." That phrase is practically identical to the promise God had made to Abraham about Isaac, to multiply, innumerable, a great people. God promises Hagar that from her son will come a nation as numerous as the nation that was to come from Sarah's son. Third, he gives her the name of her son, Ishmael, in Hebrew, Yishmael. It literally means God hears. Because, says the angel, God has heard your affliction. And then comes the phrase that is going to define 4 millennia of history. The phrase that you are going to see in the news tonight, even if you do not know you are seeing it. "He shall be like a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brothers." You need to understand what that phrase means in the original Hebrew, because translated into English it loses 80% of its force. The expression is per Adam, literally wild donkey of man. And here there is a grammatical particularity that almost no one notices. In Hebrew, the adjective normally goes after the noun. If the idea were a man like a wild donkey, the text would say Adam per, but it says it the other way around. It says per Adam, wild donkey first, man afterward, as if wild donkey were the central noun and man were merely an attached detail. The root per does not appear as a common verb in biblical Hebrew, but it appears in ancient Arabic in the word farah, which means to run free, to escape any control, not to submit to a yoke. And that is exactly what the angel is describing, a lineage that will never accept being dominated, a people impossible to colonize, impossible to subjugate, impossible to break, independent unto death. The book of Job describes the per, the wild donkey, with a poetic beauty that is hard to surpass. Who has set the wild donkey free? Who has loosed his bonds? I gave him the wilderness as his home, and the salt land as his dwelling place. He scorns the bustle of the city. He does not hear the shouts of the driver. He ranges the mountains as his pasture. That is the prophecy about Ishmael, a free man, an untamable man, a man who laughs at the cities, who does not accept drivers, who moves through the mountains seeking his own pasture, a man of the desert, a Bedouin, a nomad, an independent warrior. But the verse does not end there. It continues with two more phrases, and those are the ones that should freeze your blood when you think about today's headlines. A medieval Jewish commentator named Ramban called the second part of this verse the open prophecy. Because it does not close, it has no expiration date. It does not say for 100 years, nor until such an event. It says simply that Ishmael's hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, without time, without condition, without escape. And then the final phrase, he shall dwell in the presence of all his brothers. In Hebrew, al pene kolejav, literally before the face of all his brothers, not beside, not far away, not in harmony, before the face to face, in perpetual tension. If you open a map of the Middle East right now, in May of 2026, you are going to see the prophecy fulfilled geographically. Israel, a small strip on the Mediterranean, surrounded literally by 22 countries with majority Arab populations, before the face of all his brothers, 40 centuries later. Stop for a second. You have to see what just happened. A text written on parchment, in an era when Egypt and Babylon were the only powers of the known world, predicted geography, politics, and war of a Middle East no one could imagine. Without drones, without missiles, without the United Nations, without the internet, without the State of Israel, without the word Palestine, and it is being fulfilled tonight. While you watch this video, someone in the West Bank is welding iron to reinforce a roof against another attack. Someone in Sderot is running with their child toward a shelter. Someone in Beirut is burying a relative. Someone in Khan Yunis is searching through rubble. 4,000 years ago, a single phrase, and it still does not fail. If this does not move something inside you, it is not because of the text. It is because you stopped reading the Bible as if it were a living book. But the story does not end with Ishmael in the desert. The crack deepens with the next chapter. Abraham was 86 years old when Ishmael was born. And for 13 years, from Hagar's pregnancy to the birth of Isaac, Abraham believed sincerely that Ishmael was the son of the promise. 13 years raising a boy, teaching him to draw a bow, to read the desert stars, to recognize the tracks of flocks in the sand, hoping to see him grow and inherit the covenant. Picture the scene. A father, an only son, an old man of 99 years, playing with a teenager of 13. 13 years of love. 13 years of plans. 13 years of Abraham telling his son, "You are the one who is going to carry all this forward." And then one day, God visits the tent and tells him a phrase that destroys Abraham's heart. "Sarah, your wife, will bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant, for him and for his descendants after him." Abraham almost falls to the ground, and he begs God a phrase that has always broken me inside. "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." It is the plea of a father. "Please, God, do not discard him. He is my son. I love him. Look out for him. Consider him." Stop for a moment on that phrase, because there is something in Hebrew that the translation does not capture. The expression Abraham uses is, "Lu Yishmael yijeh lefaneja." "Oh, that Ishmael might live before your face." And here, a silent, almost cruel wordplay occurs. The name Ishmael contains the root shama, which means to hear. God hears. And the name God is going to give to the other son, not yet born, is Yitzchak, which comes from tzajak, to laugh. God laughs. Picture the scene from heaven's point of view. Two sons, one whose name is God hears, another whose name will be He will laugh. And the father at 99 years old pleading that the first one, the one who already exists, the one who already has a face and a voice and a heart of his own, not be erased by the second, who is barely a promise. And God responds with a divine subtlety almost no one notices. He tells Abraham two distinct things for two distinct sons. He blesses Ishmael. He is going to multiply him. 12 princes will be born from him. From him will come a great nation. And he adds a precious detail, almost as if responding in echo to the boy's name. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. God hears the father as God heard the mother in the desert 13 years before. The same Hebrew word, shama, to hear. God listens to Hagar's clan generation after generation. But the covenant, the eternal covenant, the covenant of the Messiah, the covenant of the promised land, the covenant of the altar, the covenant of the sacrifice, the covenant of the cross that would come 2,000 years later, that covenant is established with Isaac, not with Ishmael. And here is where the wound becomes theological, because now it is no longer just a rivalry between two brothers. It is a distinction of eternal purpose. One receives material blessing, the other receives the redemptive promise. One will have 12 princes, the other will have 12 tribes that will bring the Messiah to the world. And a father has to live the rest of his days knowing that. I'm going to repeat it because it is important. Knowing that he loves both sons equally, but that only one will carry the promise that will change human history. Any father who has had to make an impossible decision between his children knows the weight Abraham carried that night. If you think the story of the rivalry ended there, wait. The final blow comes in chapter 21, and it is the cruelest of all. Isaac is born. Sarah, at 90 years old, miraculously becomes pregnant and gives birth to the son of the promise, and the house fills with jubilation. But also instantly, with tension. 3 years passed, Isaac was weaned, and Abraham, according to the tradition of the era, organized a great banquet to celebrate the weaning of his son. Relatives, neighbors, servants, members of the clan, all invited. A feast that was practically a national feast for the patriarchal family. And in the middle of the feast, Sarah saw something that made her blood boil. And Sarah saw that the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, was Metzajek. That Hebrew word is ambiguous. Some translations render it as mocking, others as playing, others as laughing. The verb comes from the same root as the name Isaac, Yitzchak, which means he will laugh. There is a bilingual cruelty in the text. Ishmael, around 17 years old, is mocking the name of his 3-year-old little brother. Laughing, possibly, at the very name of the child, like a teenager jealous of the baby who stole his place. And Sarah exploded for the second time. This time it was not just anger, it was a sentence. Cast out this servant and her son, for the son of this servant shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. Abraham heard that phrase and his heart broke. The text says that the matter seemed very grave to Abraham because of his son, singular. At that moment in Abraham's heart, Ishmael was still his son, not merely the son of the servant, but God spoke to Abraham and confirmed to him that he had to do it, that he had to send Ishmael away, that he had to let the servant and her son go to the desert, and he repeated the promise to him. From the son of the servant I will also make a nation, because he is your offspring. Picture Abraham that dawn, before the sun rose, preparing a skin of water, a loaf of bread, a few provisions, and loading them onto the shoulders of a woman he had loved, a woman who had given him his first son, a woman who was about to walk into the desert with a teenager he had raised for 17 years. So Abraham rose very early in the morning. He took bread, he took a skin of water, he gave it to Hagar, he put it on her shoulder, he handed her the boy, and he sent her away. The biblical text does not record a single word among the three of them. Not a kiss, not a blessing, not a promise to see each other again. Only movements, bread, water, shoulder, boy, goodbye. It is one of the densest silences in all of Scripture. 4 dry phrases describe what must have been, emotionally, an apocalyptic dawn. There are rabbinic traditions that imagine Abraham waking up before the whole family, lighting a small oil lamp, walking to the corner where Hagar and Ishmael were sleeping, and crouching down beside his teenage son to look at him one last time before waking him. We do not know if that happened, but the silence of the text leaves space precisely for that image, a father, watching the sleep of a son he is about to lose, knowing that the next time he looks at him, if a next time exists, he will no longer be the same boy. And she left, and she wandered through the desert of Beersheba. You have to understand what kind of place that is. Beersheba is in the south of Canaan, on the boundary between the cultivable land and the Negev. It still exists today. It is a dry, dusty region with temperatures that in summer exceed 45 degrees Celsius. The skin burns in an hour. The water of a complete skin lasts, with luck, 2 days for a mother and a teenager. And the wells in that area, in that era, were at enormous distances from one another, and many were the property of tribes that did not share their water with strangers. Hagar was walking in circles. She did not know where to go. She was not from Canaan. She was not from Egypt. She was in a foreign land with a teenage son loaded with resentment for having been expelled, without a clan, without protection, without a future. When the water ran out, she knew they were dead. There is a detail in that scene that breaks all the schemes, and it is the strength with which God sustains Hagar. When the water runs out, Hagar leaves her son under a bush and moves away, weeping because she does not want to see him die. She says, "I will not see when the boy dies," and she sits opposite him, lifts up her voice and weeps. And God hears the boy. That is the key phrase. God heard the voice of the boy. And the angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven and tells her, "Do not fear, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Arise, lift up the boy, and hold him with your hand, for I will make of him a great nation." God opens Hagar's eyes, and she sees a well of water. She fills the skin. She gives the boy to drink, and the boy lived. And here is where you have to stop and breathe, because God did not abandon Ishmael. God did not curse Ishmael. God did not condemn the descendants of Ishmael. God blessed Ishmael. God took care of Ishmael. God promised to make of Ishmael a great nation. The biblical text, read honestly, does not present Ishmael as a negative character. It presents him as a son loved by his father, heard by God, sustained in the desert, multiplied into 12 tribes, destined to a greatness of his own. The difference is not of affection. The difference is of covenant. And this is important because when popular Christian theology caricatures Arabs as the cursed people or the people of the devil, it is misreading the text. The Bible never says that. The Bible says that Ishmael is blessed, that God heard him, that he is the son of Abraham, that he has a promise of his own. But it also says, without softening, that the redemptive line passes through Isaac, and that between the two brothers there will be perpetual tension until the end. There is a fact that is almost always omitted, and that changes the weight of this entire story. In Genesis, after Abraham dies, the Bible records something that is almost never preached. It says, literally, Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, buried him, the two of them, together, in the cave of Machpelah, opposite Mamre. The two brothers were once again side by side, in silence, to bury the man who had fathered both of them. Some ancient rabbis in the Midrash on Genesis read that verse as a sign of reconciliation. Ishmael the elder symbolically yielded the firstborn status to Isaac, mentioned first in the text. And that, they say, was the proof that Ishmael, in his maturity, repented. The reconciliation lasted one funeral, one day, maybe two. After that, the descendants of the two brothers followed completely different paths, and the paths eventually crossed again. But not in a funeral tent, on battlefields. There is something almost prophetic in that funeral, as if God were leaving a clue, as if he were saying, "Look, in my presence before the death of Abraham, the two of you can be together. Reconciliation is possible, but you will choose otherwise." And they chose otherwise. Children repeat what parents did not resolve. It is one of the silent laws of the human family. What is not healed in one generation is inherited in the next. And what is inherited in the next, if it is also not healed, is multiplied in the one that comes after. Sarah was jealous of Hagar. Isaac inherited the suspicion against Ishmael. Jacob had conflict with Esau. The sons of Jacob sold Joseph to a caravan of Ishmaelites. And, generation after generation, the wounds of the original tent kept expanding, like ripples in water, until they became the oldest geopolitical conflict on the planet. A woman, a servant, a passive husband. 4,000 years later, we are still paying the consequences. The descendants of Ishmael settled in the desert of Arabia, from the north of the peninsula to the present-day Emirates. They had 12 princes, as God had promised. The Bible records the names one by one: Nebaioth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, Kedema. 12 sons, 12 tribes, 12 chapters of an entire people coming out of a single man. And the promise was fulfilled with mathematical precision. These sons of Ishmael occupied an enormous zone, from the north of Arabia to the desert of Egypt, from Syria to the Persian Gulf. Approximately 1,800 kilometers from north to south, 900 from east to west, a surface equivalent to half of Western Europe. And here happens something that is almost never mentioned in the pulpits. Those 12 tribes are not names floating in the air. They are names that appear, one by one, in the Assyrian annals, in the Babylonian inscriptions, in the Persian chronicles. The tribe of Kedar was the most powerful. The prophet Jeremiah mentions it as an example of a distant people, alongside the island of Cyprus, to indicate two opposite extremes of the known world. Kedar dominated the north of Arabia for centuries, until being absorbed by the Nabateans in the 1st century before Christ. The tribe of Tema gave its name to a strategic oasis in the desert, and there King Nabonidus of Babylon, the father of Belshazzar, exiled himself for 10 years. The tribe of Adbeel appears in the records of the Assyrian king Tiglath-Pileser III as Idibilu, in charge of guarding the border with Egypt, each name from Genesis, each one verified in stone, in baked clay, in imperial archives. The promise made in a tent in the desert 4,000 years ago left an archaeological trace in 3 different empires. But there is an even more interesting detail. The descendants of Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, were, according to the Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, the direct ancestors of the Nabateans. Some modern specialists dispute that connection, but Josephus, who lived in the 1st century and knew those peoples up close, affirmed it without hesitation. The Nabateans, those who built Petra, that impossible city carved into pink rock in the south of Jordan. Those who had a king named Aretas IV, who reigned when Jesus still walked through Galilee. And here comes the connection almost no one makes. In the second letter of the Apostle Paul to the Corinthians, in chapter 11, Paul tells one of his most dramatic escapes. In Damascus, he says, The governor of the province of King Aretas was guarding the city to apprehend me, and I was let down by a window in a basket through the wall and escaped his hands. Paul escaped from a descendant of Ishmael, lowered in a basket, through a wall, in the middle of the night, 4,000 years after the prophecy, a son of Isaac escaping from a son of Ishmael, and the family conflict still deciding destinies of the New Testament. The Islamic tradition, written centuries later in the Seerah, the biography of Muhammad, traces the genealogy of the Prophet of Islam directly back to Ishmael through Kedar. Muhammad, according to Muslim tradition, is an Ishmaelite, son of the desert, son of the son of Hagar, son of the secondary promise. And according to the same tradition, the Kaaba in Mecca, the geographic center of Islam, was originally built by Abraham and Ishmael together. Visiting that place, says the Quran in Surah 2, father and son raised the foundations of the house, asking God to accept their work. Stop again, because this is enormous. Islam, the faith that more than 2 billion people profess today, traces its spiritual origin to the rejected son of the covenant, to the son of the desert, to the son of the prophecy of the wild donkey. And the tension between Judaism and Islam is not, in essence, a theological dispute between two strange religions. It is a family dispute between two brothers, a dispute over the inheritance, a dispute over the covenant, a dispute over who is the true son of Abraham. 4,000 years later, it remains the same dispute. If this is blowing your mind as much as it blew mine when I understood it for the first time, do not keep it to yourself. Give the video a like. I am not asking you to subscribe if you do not want to. I am not asking you to share if you do not feel it. Just give it a like, because that small gesture tells YouTube that this matters to someone, and it allows it to reach another person who needs to hear exactly this story, the way it reached you. And now comes the most difficult part, the part almost no one preaches, the part you will rarely hear in a Sunday sermon. Because we are going to leave the Arab world for a moment, and we are going to talk about the descendants of Isaac, because the prophecy does not have only one direction, it has two, and the other direction is uncomfortable just as strongly. From Isaac was born Jacob, from Jacob were born 12 sons, from those 12 sons were born the 12 tribes of Israel, and from the 12 tribes came David, and from David came Solomon. And 1,000 years later, from the line of David came a poor carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, the promised offspring through whom the entire world would receive salvation. Paul the Apostle, in his letter to the Galatians, makes it explicit. Now to Abraham and his seed were the promises made. He saith not, and to seeds, as of many, but as of one, and to thy seed, which is Christ. That is the line of Isaac. That is the promise of the covenant. That is the reason God chose Isaac and not Ishmael. Not because of arbitrary favoritism, not because of ethnic preference, but because through Isaac was going to come the Messiah who was going to open salvation for the Gentiles also, for the Arabs, for the Egyptians, for the Romans, for the Chinese, for you. The election of Isaac was not against Ishmael. It was so that finally salvation would reach all the peoples of the planet, including the people of Ishmael, including your own blood. But the line of Isaac also inherited something else. It inherited a permanent hostility with its half-brothers. And that hostility, when you read the entire Old Testament, never stops. Look at this. Every time Israel goes through a crisis in the Bible, the descendants of Ishmael are involved. When Joseph is sold by his brothers in Genesis, who buys him and takes him to Egypt? A caravan of Ishmaelites, of Midianites, Arab merchants of the desert. And here is the detail the text records with an almost cinematographic precision. The caravan was coming from Gilead, in present-day Jordan, and was descending toward Egypt, loaded with 3 specific products: aromatic gum, balm, and myrrh. Stop on that word, myrrh. That Ishmaelite caravan was transporting one of the most expensive products of the ancient world, a resin extracted from trees in the south of Arabia, controlled precisely by the tribes descended from Ishmael. The roads through which that merchandise traveled were famous. They called them the King's Highway, which connected the Gulf of Aqaba with Damascus, and the Way of the Sea, which passed precisely near Dothan, where Joseph was abandoned in a dry cistern waiting to die. The road through which the caravan of the Ishmaelites passed was not just any route, it was the incense road. The same road that 1800 years later would bring 3 men from the east, following a star, with gifts in their hands, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Did you see it? The same resin that traveled on the back of an Ishmaelite camel toward Egypt, carrying with it a Jewish slave named Joseph, would end up, 18 centuries later, reaching the hands of a Jewish boy named Jesus, in a manger in Bethlehem, a descendant of Isaac. The same word, the same substance, carried by descendants of Ishmael to deposit it at the feet of the Messiah. The Bible is an absurdly well-woven book. The descendants of Ishmael literally were the means by which Israel ended up enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. And without knowing it, they were also part of the great mechanism that conducted the Messiah to the moment of his birth. When Gideon fights against the enemies of Israel in the book of Judges, the enemies are Midianites, another Ishmaelite branch. When David flees from Saul in the first book of Samuel, he takes refuge among the Philistines but combats the Amalekites. The Amalekites are descendants of Esau, yes, but mixed with the desert peoples who descended in part from Ishmael. The rivalry never stops. When Nehemiah rebuilds the walls of Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, his principal adversaries are Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite servant, and Geshem the Arab. 3 ethnicities, one single thing in common: descent from Ishmael or from related peoples, hostile to the return of the Jews to the land. 4,000 years, same dynamics, same families, same territorial tensions. Does it not seem strange to you that a people that was exiled twice, persecuted, scattered throughout the entire planet, persecuted by the Romans, by the Crusaders, by the Spanish Inquisition, by the Nazis, returns to its ancestral land in 1948 and finds itself with exactly the same hostile neighbors its ancestors faced 3,000 years before? It is not coincidence. It is prophecy. But there is one more layer, and it is the layer Paul unlocked 2,000 years ago in a letter that keeps exploding theologically every time you read it carefully. Later, writing to the Galatians, Paul takes the story of Sarah and Hagar and says something that must have scandalized his Jewish readers. He says, "These 2 women are an allegory, that is, a symbolic representation of something larger. Sarah represents the covenant of freedom. Hagar represents the covenant of slavery. Sarah represents the Jerusalem above, the heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of the promise. Hagar represents the Jerusalem below, the Jerusalem that is in slavery with her children." And here, Paul inverts everything. Because for the Jews of the first century, they were the children of Sarah, the children of the free woman, the children of the covenant, and the Gentiles were the children of Hagar, the slaves of paganism. Paul inverts the reading. He says that those who trust in the law, in works, in self-salvation, are children of Hagar, regardless of their Jewish blood. And those who trust in the promise, in grace, in Christ, are children of Sarah, regardless of their Gentile blood. The descent in spiritual terms is not by blood, it is by faith. This is radical, because it means that an Arab who believes in Christ is, spiritually, a son of Isaac, a son of the promise, a son of the free woman, and that a Jew who rejects the Messiah is, spiritually, a son of Hagar, a son of slavery, a son of the servant. The spiritual border does not coincide with the ethnic border, and that explains why today, among the more than 2 billion Muslims in the world, there are tens of thousands who are converting to Christ. In dreams, in supernatural encounters, in secret discoveries of the New Testament, underground churches in Iran, in Algeria, in Morocco, in Saudi Arabia, physical sons of Ishmael who are turning into spiritual sons of Isaac, and finally, finding the peace that no geopolitical agreement could give them. There are Christian missiologists who have spent decades studying this phenomenon. They call it in English the Isa movement, because Isa is the name of Jesus in Arabic. It is one of the fastest and least covered religious movements in history. In the Iran of the Ayatollahs, where converting from Islam to Christianity can cost you your life, there are estimates that speak of hundreds of thousands of secret believers. The Iranian church grows at a speed no Western country reaches. In Algeria, in the very mountains of Kabylia, there are entire villages that gather on Fridays to read the Gospels in the Berber language. In Saudi Arabia, where Islam was born, where Mecca is, where the Kaaba that tradition attributes to Ishmael is, there are functionaries of the government itself who have confessed in private to having met Christ in dreams. That is historical, it is statistical, it is verifiable, and it is what almost no one tells when speaking about the Middle East. While the news shows rockets, God is, in silence, embracing the children of Hagar one by one, as he embraced the mother when she was sitting under the bush, weeping, waiting to see her boy die. The God who heard Ishmael in the desert keeps hearing them. 4,000 years later. The truth is that if you read it honestly, the conflict between Jews and Arabs will not be healed by the United Nations. It will not be healed by a treaty, nor by a world power, nor by the most sophisticated diplomacy on the planet. They tried it 1,000 times. 1,000 times it failed. Camp David, Oslo, Wye River, roadmaps, Abraham Accords, summits in Egypt, conferences in Paris, United Nations resolutions, Nobel Prizes, handshakes, promises, and 6 months later another missile. Because the conflict is not geopolitical at its root, it is theological, it is familial. It is a wound opened 4,000 years ago in a tent in the desert of Canaan, and only something divine can heal a divine wound. There is a verse in the book of Isaiah that is one of the most impressive and least preached prophecies in all of Scripture. Isaiah sees, in vision, a future day in which there will be a road from Egypt to Assyria, an open road, without armed borders. And the Egyptians will go to Assyria, and the Assyrians to Egypt, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. And says Isaiah, God will bless, saying, Blessed be Egypt my people, and Assyria the work of my hands, and Israel my heritage. 3 peoples anciently enemies. Egypt, where the mother of Ishmael was born. Assyria, successor of the lands where the descendants of Ishmael walked. And Israel, descendant of Isaac. The 3 called the people of God, the 3 blessed, the 3 walking together. That, today, seems impossible. As impossible as a birth at 90 years old, as impossible as a wild donkey accepting a bridal, as impossible as 2 brothers burying a father together after 4,000 years of hatred. But the God who promised a son to a barren woman is the same God who promised that day. And God fulfills his promises, even those that seem to take centuries. There is something else you have to see. And it is what changes the entire reading of the conflict from within. Paul, writing to the Romans, when he speaks about the final situation of Israel, uses a very clear agricultural image. He speaks of an olive tree. The olive tree is Israel. And he says that God temporarily cut some natural branches, the branches of the Israel that rejected the Messiah, and in their place grafted in branches of wild olive, the nations, the Gentiles. But he warns, do not boast against the natural branches, Because if God could graft you in, you who were from a wild olive tree, much more easily will he graft the natural branches back into their own tree. The final salvation of Israel, says Paul, is going to come. All Israel will be saved. That theologians have been discussing it for 2,000 years, but the general image is clear. There will be a day when the cut branches will be grafted back, and the entire tree, Jew and Gentile, son of Sarah and son of Hagar, son of Isaac and son of Ishmael, will be gathered in the same Messiah. And here, finally, the wound closes. Because the only figure in all of human history who fulfills the promises given to Abraham for both his sons at the same time is Jesus. He fulfills the promise to Isaac because he comes from his line. He fulfills the promise to Ishmael because he makes of him a nation that can also be blessed in Christ. He fulfills the promise to Abraham because in him all human blood is reconciled. The original promise of God to Abraham: in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. All, not only Israel, all, including the family of Ishmael. Now mentally rewind to the beginning of this video. The headlines, the missiles, the walls, the broken agreements, the children crying in 2 languages, the mothers burying sons, all that is still there today, tonight, real. But now you see it differently. Now you know that you are not looking at a political conflict 5,000 years old. You are looking at a family wound, a wound opened one night in a tent when a woman did not have patience with a promise of God. Now you know that no treaty is going to heal what no human caused, that no international conference is going to close what one single God opened, that the only way to resolve a hostility of 4,000 years is for the God who prophesied it to be also the God who heals it, and that God has already begun to heal it. In every Muslim who dreams of Jesus in Iran, in every Messianic Jew in Tel Aviv who confesses the name of the carpenter from Nazareth, in every Palestinian Christian in Bethlehem who keeps celebrating Christmas under the sound of sirens, in every Arab in Lebanon who discovers the New Testament for the first time in his life. Those are the regrafts. Those are the children of Sarah and the children of Hagar gathering around the table of the same Father. Those are the brothers returning after 4 millennia to bury the past and to embrace each other in the Son of the Messiah. You do not see them in the news, but they are there. And one day, according to Isaiah, according to Paul, according to Revelation, they are all going to be together, from every tribe, from every tongue, from every family, from Isaac, from Ishmael, from Sarah, from Hagar, called by name, singing in the same language to the Lamb who opened the only door no human wall could open. Genesis 16, verse 12. 4,000 years ago. His hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. Revelation 7, verse 9. And I looked, and behold, a great multitude which no man could number, of every nation and tribe and people and tongue, who stood before the throne and in the presence of the Lamb. Between those 2 verses there are 40 centuries and a journey. The journey from the tent in the desert to the throne in heaven. The first one has already been fulfilled. The second one is being fulfilled.